Welcome to the Peterson Institute for International Economics for a very special day. And I'm delighted to see both a number of old friends, supporters, but also some people who have not always been here before or not been here frequently, which is part of the point. I'm Adam Posen. I'm the president of the Peterson Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our day-long conference on ethics and globalization, the trade-offs underlying our policy choices. The idea of this conference came through an interaction with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, which has generously supported our work on this. Howard Rosen and Steve Wiseman here at the Institute have directed the project for us, along with Mia Adamowski, and contributions from other senior fellows who you'll be hearing from today. And they've done wonderful work, and we also have a number of publications in train, including we will be taping and transcribing and editing this event. In another part of our new efforts, not only to broaden our reach thematically and in terms of audience, we're also trying, thanks to our friends now at the New Republic, to broaden our promotion and our outreach in that form. We're partnering with them, and a lot of what goes on today through their editorial guys will be appearing in the pages of New Republic magazine, New Republic website, and that's a first step for us in new media partnering. So a lot of new stuff going on, but our core remains what to advise policymakers and stakeholders in the global economy on how to make globalization work. And to this day, I will point out one of our best-selling, if not our best-selling ever publication, is our friend Danny Roderick's Has Globalization Gone Too Far?, which was a challenge he laid down for us many years ago. And we have published a number of things, including by his current Kennedy School colleague, Robert Lawrence, who's a senior fellow here, Has Globalization Gone Far Enough? But I'm delighted, among many other people, to have Danny here with us today. The point is to try to remind people as we start a new year, start a new administration, start confronting in a longer term sense some of the failures of the economics models that we saw over the last few years in the West, how we manage and think about globalization going forward. Obviously, the Institute's commitment and our primary toolkit is to think about how to do the best policies, normally from a cost-benefit analysis point of view, from a pure economic analytic point of view. But it is not that simple, as many of the ethicists, philosophers, as well as policymakers and economists who are joining us today will talk about. I've got just a filler here to say I'm talking about the need for challenging choices, and I mean that in two senses. First, that in this audience, we have a number of influential people, and we want to ask you to challenge the choices that some of you are already making or the people you advise are making. It's not going to be as straightforward. But also that there are challenging choices to be made, and we are delighted to have 4 sessions today, plus in a moment I'll talk about our distinguished luncheon speaker, to deal with this. Thinking about how a policymaker, how someone in a democratic society should be thinking about the benefits of economics for the globe as a whole, what we would refer to as global welfare versus national welfare. Now, in point of fact, one of the core beliefs at this institute, and I think rightly, is the ultimate fact on the ground of globalization over the last 20 years is the 1.5 billion people in China, India, and Eastern Europe who are freer and wealthier than they have been at any time in human history. But as we're going to be discussing recurrently, and in fact, Lynn Rothschild and I are sponsoring an event here a week from today on this, there are also, of course, huge issues of inequality and social mobility in the developed world. And are these two linked? Did it come at a cost? We're going to be talking about balancing economic goals between generations. This is a very critical topic. The rubber meets the road right now on the issues of austerity versus fighting the current depression, the current recession. We have a very exciting panel of people with strong views on this here to talk about it. As you all know, Pete Peterson, who funds the independent, completely different from the Peterson Institute, Peterson Foundation, has also a very strong set of views, very principled set of views, and we're going to hear some views affiliated with that. And the point is not to dismiss them in any way, but to give them the fair discussion that they deserve in an open fashion. And that's part of what this institute does. Thirdly, we're going to talk about expecting ethical duties from private actors. This is a question both in a cynical sense, if you think that there's very little that in a world of global competition in the short term that can be legislated. There is huge competition between countries, between companies, and you can have a race to the bottom, although we have certainly people here who can argue against that. But also in an idealistic sense. There are people who have argued that companies can transcend the standards to which they're expected to go and can voluntarily do a lot of good, frankly. And the question is, can multinational companies be expected to do that, and how? And so we have two people, George David, who's vice chairman of our board of directors and is no longer affiliated with, but was the distinguished chairman and CEO of United Technologies and created their program for educating all of their employees, giving them access to education. And Sir Evelyn Robert de Rothschild, who has been speaking out very bluntly about ethical failures in various spheres, but especially in the financial sector, which he knows so well. But neither of them are going to apologize for capitalism. And we also have, of course, on that panel, the distinguished political scientist, Charlie Sable, who's been writing radically and constructively, and Kim Elliott, who used to be at the Institute and is now at our sister shop, the Center for Global Development, and has written with Richard Freeman about labor standards. So that will be a very exciting panel for you all to look forward to. And then finally, in closing, we spend a lot of time, I was just talking to Colin Bradford about the laser-like focus on the G20 that he has. As you well know, my predecessor, Fred Bergsten, never saw a G he didn't like. G2, G7, G8, G20. And underlying all that is the question, at what point do you have to think about your responsibilities to global governance as opposed to the local control? And that's going to be a core message we're going to be talking about. I mentioned Danny Roderick. Michael Froman from the National Economic Council at the White House will be joining us to give a practitioner's perspective on that balancing act. Andrew Moravchik from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, a dear old friend and one of the great experts on Europe as well as political philosophy and practice, is going to give his view of multilateralism. And Howard Rosen, who, as I mentioned, is one of the co-chairs of this project for us, will be giving a view on subsidiarity. I haven't mentioned all the big names. I apologize for that. Their bios, and they're here on the program. They'll be introduced by our moderators as we go. I just will say two thank yous and one practical note. First thank you is again to Howard Rosen and Steve Wiseman, who took the lead on this project when it was a very inchoate thing, and have worked very intensively with me over the last 4 months to produce what we have today, which I think is an extremely exciting conference and event. And Steve Wiseman is at work on a new book that will be following up on this in coming months. They did great work, and Howard in particular helped gather some of the ethicists and philosophers who were honored to be willing to come across the street, both literally and so to speak, to be here today. But also a strong thank you, again, to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and to Stelios Vasilakis, who's with us today and will be moderating the third panel. The Niarchos Foundation has been a major supporter of work here at the Institute, but they do enormous work now in Greece in light of the crisis on a very real practical level in human terms. And they are an example of a great philanthropy, and it's very great to have their perspective as well as their support. The final practical thing, and this is the most Washington thing I will say, is, as I think you're all aware, Congressman, the Honorable Barney Frank, will be joining us as our luncheon speaker today. And as you're all aware, Barney is probably the most forthright and in some ways most incisive member of Congress to have graced Congress in some years. And we are delighted and thrilled to have him give his first public speech since leaving Congress. However, as some of you may have heard, he also apparently might become a senator. And there are some people who would be interested in him solely for that trivial reason. We will be herding those people after lunch into a separate press conference so we can stay focused on the issues at hand today. With no more ado, I'll call on Steve Wiseman, who's been working and designing the moderation of all our panels, to come up and moderate the first panel. Again, thank you all very much for joining us, especially our speakers who came a long way to join us. Thank you.